a lot of those stars are in orbits around the galaxy that are quite different than the stars that were originally part of the galaxy. Stars originally part of the galaxy generally follow the disk. They move in the plane. But you'll see these stars that are moving in this like wonky, like weird processing motions.
Welcome to Metaverse Degen. I'm Lion.
I'm old man Raptor in a jar. You can see that, folks. And our guest is, and he's one hell of a guest. You are?
Oh, I'm Astro Rabbit.
Oh, thank you very much for joining us, Astro. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah,
Thank you for your time.
great to have you here, Astro.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Oh, well, let's start with the meat and potatoes of the conversation. What are you most known for? How'd you get started, and what got you into VRChat?
That's multiple big things.
Yes. We do that a lot.
Okay.
You better get used to it. It's usually 3 on 3.
Well, we'll tell us like a story then, which would be started with me entering VRChat, because that kind of leads into how I guess I'm known as. I don't actually know how many people know me, but whatever. So I got started like a lot of people in VRChat when the pandemic hit the world, and it was like, what do I do with my with all this time of sitting at home? And I had gotten a VR headset to play Half-Life Alyx, is why I'd gotten a VR headset. And I was like, well, I might as well check out this VRChat thing, because I'd heard about it before. Hopped into it, did your standard new person entering VRChat during the pandemic, like wandering around. And I would see stuff online about people doing like, oh, they'd hop into an instance and play the piano for the instance, and people would request piano stuff. Or they would do other things, and people would take an interest in it. And so I had the selfish thought of like, I wonder if there's anything I could do that would like draw interest. But I play music for fun, but I'm nowhere near the ability to actually like play for a group. Since I kind of looked at something I do professionally, which I guess would lead into something about myself, the real me, in my background. So I'm a graduate student, or soon to be finished graduate student in astronomy. Although when I entered VRChat, I was just finishing my first year of grad school. In a doctoral program, PhD. So in just a few months, I guess I'll be Dr. Astro Rabbit. But so I'm a PhD grad student in astronomy, and so pandemic's going. We're doing classes. I'm trying to get research, and I'm doing this whole transition because I'd started grad school before the pandemic, and I went through that transition like everyone did during my first year. And one of the things I really enjoyed doing in real life is outreach, where we would take telescopes or meteorites or whatever and go to schools or public events and answer people's questions about space and show the things we had. And so couldn't do that in person. There was a pandemic going on, no events in person. So I figured, it might be interesting to bring that into VRChat. So with my very limited Unity skills, I imported a really silly image. It was like a portrait of Carl Sagan. For anyone who doesn't know who Carl Sagan is, he was a famous astronomer. Did a lot of outreach. And it had a little quote bubble that said, ask me anything about astronomy. Hopped into that and sat in the corner of like the pug, the black cat, before a lot of the Quest kids came in. I'd sit off to the side and just let people come up to me if they wanted to. If no one came up after like 10, 15 minutes, I just would hop to another instance. I had nothing better really to do. There was a lot of free time in that summer, because I did this during that first summer of the pandemic. And the thing that surprised me the most was the fact that people did actually take an interest, and they would come up and ask questions. A lot of people thought it was a joke. And then, they would ask joke questions, but I've had plenty of experience in person outreach of dealing with joke or mini, not really troll questions, like lighthearted troll questions where they're not trying to be mean, just a joke, and playing along with it. but then like trying to actually teach something off of it, and people would go like, "Oh wait, you're legit, you're real," and you're like, "Yeah." And so I just did that. I got better. I made an avatar. It actually was this base original avatar, but with different outfits, and repeated the same thing with a little speech bubble saying, "Ask me about astronomy," and would go around and just talk in instances. Met a bunch of cool people. A lot of them I still hang out with to this day. That like I met them through talking about it, but then we would hang out outside me talking about astronomy. And then it reached a point where I wanted to do something a little bit more than just randomly meeting people in instances, like something a bit more organized. So I had thoughts like many people probably have had at one point or another of like, oh, it'd be neat to do YouTube videos, but I'm not very charismatic or video charismatic. That sounds like a lot of effort. I was like, I'm not going to delude myself with thinking I can easily, just make a YouTube channel. That sounds like a lot of work. And not something I would be really good at. So one of my friends convinced me to instead try and make a community, a Discord community. There was, this was, I'd say it wasn't not early days of VRChat, but it was during the like meteoric rise of VRChat during the pandemic. And so a lot of new communities are being formed, and so yeah, a lot of new communities are being formed, but there was no science community in general, or anything real along that. The closest community that existed, which formed just slightly before I wound up forming a community, was a Japanese group, the Virtual Space Program, primarily Japanese language, but they're a bunch of cool people. Didn't know about them at the time though. But in retrospect, I know they were the only other ones. So we formed a Discord community. We just called it STEM VR because we were very unoriginal. we couldn't think of a better name. It was like, well, we're going to do the STEM subjects. STEM standing for science, technology, engineering, math. I didn't want to be super specific to astronomy, even though that's my background. I wanted to kind of have an encouragement of all sorts of different fields. Because I had met a lot of other academics that did other fields, and so the people that made up this, because I didn't found it by myself, it was kind of a co-founding of multiple people. So we had some people who were engineering college students. We had someone who just graduated from college and doing wildlife ecology. We had some. We have like someone who's more of a just everyday layman, but he also had some background in like storm chasing and meteorology, and a few others, and that was the start of it. And slowly just kind of, there was no fundamental organization to how to do it, so it was slow going until one of our members, or one of the founders, his name is Spiritmarsrover. That's his in-game name. He had this idea for a while of doing, making a world that shows, is like a TV experience sort of thing. It would play the original, so it was, you would watch in this world on the screen, a video player, the original Cosmos series by Carl Sagan that aired in the 80s. Still a classic in science communication, holds up to this day, at least in my opinion, a lot of other people's opinions. So Spirit wanted to make this world where like you watch it while sitting inside like the set of the show, and then as you would visit different places, both real and imagined, in Cosmos, as it shows the world and the space and the solar system and such, the set would change, the environment would change around you. So now you're watching the sequence about the Voyager spacecraft passing by Jupiter. Well, now the whole set that you are in physically in VR and VRChat is now flying past Jupiter, just like the screen is. And would be all in sync with it. He just spent a lot of effort on it, and so he decided to do this big like watch party. So everyone that I talked to, and everyone else that was in Denver would talk to others like, hey, you should come to if they've ever heard of Cosmos, they want to see it, come join us when we were airing these. And we had our first like big growth of people coming in, especially when one of our members, who was one of the founders, who was very involved with the DJ community, the early DJ community, brought a lot of them in, and they brought a lot of more people in, and so that's kind of how we got our start. And from then since, we've just been kind of like trying to connect people who have various interests and different STEM subjects together to be able to talk about whatever interests them. Or at least that's been the goal. We've had ups and downs with kind of like how active we are in doing various things. A big reason for that is the fact that the crossover of who has a lot of experience to be able to talk about their subjects and who has a lot of free time and the skills to set up and run a lot of these things. There's not a huge amount of overlap, and that overlap has actually dwindled as time went on away from the pandemic, because we started to have to get back more and more into the stuff we were doing. It's definitely true in my case, because I had to focus on eventually graduating, and I'm almost there. But that's probably what I'm actually known for, is the STEM VR community, helping spread that. I don't know if I wouldn't call myself the face of it. I probably was back in the day, when most of this STEM VR community was just people I had met and ran into in my travels of putting a sign up and telling them, hey, you should join this community. Nowadays it's more word of mouth and such, so a lot of people probably haven't even might not have had direct interactions with me. But I help manage it along with others. We're trying to continue it and try to do more. Like I said, it's kind of ups and downs depending on how much time a lot of us have and are able to commit into it. But the passion has always been to just try and let people with different backgrounds in STEM subjects, either backgrounds in STEM subjects or just an interest in STEM subjects. That's a key thing. A lot of people in the STEM VR community don't actually do STEM related fields at all. They just want to hear about physics stuff or astronomy stuff or biology stuff. They want to hear from people who actually do them, what's going on directly. So it's a chance to let that happen. So yeah, and the main thing that STEM VR is probably known for right now, for anyone who does know about it, we host a weekly event called Tea Time, which is basically a super casual gathering for people. Occasionally we'll do big talks, but we haven't been able to do much because of, again, time commitments. But the hope is to change that, to do even more. So I guess that answers the questions you had, both the how I got there, where I came from, and what I'm known for.
Most definitely.
So
I will.
Astro.
Oh, you shoot.
Okay, since when you got into VR, what was the weirdest thing you ever saw in VR?
The weirdest thing. Oh God, it's one of those. That's one of those questions where the list is so long, it's kind of hard to pick a weirdest.
Okay.
Weirdest thing. I mean, I've seen some pretty cursed avatars. Like, when I say cursed, I mean like the not straight up terrible, just like makes you double take sort of thing. Those can be kind of funny. That's not necessarily weird, I guess, for VRChat standards.
To be fair, what the conventional person would find weird, we find a normal average day. So to be fair, VRChat standards a bit out there.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Hey, no, that ain't weird. That looks normal. That's cool. Hey, nice avatar you got there. And everybody else looks like, are you on something? Are you on something? What are you looking at? I'm seeing the same thing. Yeah, it's funny. We get a kick out of it.
Oh, so I will kind of lead in with this question a bit. Over the years of you being in VRChat with STEM VR, what have been some memorable moments or events you've done with STEM VR, and why?
Probably the most memorable, I would say, is probably that original Cosmos viewing, because that was something special. Almost no one had seen anything like that in VRChat as a whole. And to be honest, I haven't really seen anyone do anything quite equivalent to its sense. It's kind of still unique. It is also a public world, so I guess you can actually hunt that world down and go to it. Still, there's other events that were memorable, like probably another big one, because this actually we almost capped an instance out with this when the Perseverance rover, flipping those two, the Perseverance rover landing on Mars. We did a watch party for the live stream. We did that inside a recreation of the JPL, what's called the I think they call it the Black Room. It's our control room. We did a watch party in there. That was also actually kind of cool because we in STEM VR we had met and know someone who was on the imaging team for Perseverance rover. So they kind of gave us a little bit of the behind the scenes of stuff that was going on. That was really cool because it was a pretty big instance. The word had gotten out to the greater VRChat community about that event, so I think we hit the instance cap for that. That's also when I met a lot more I guess the well-known VRChat people. I don't know how else to describe them. I think that's where I met like Tupper, for instance. I think because he was there, and a few others. But the memorable thing was just seeing this large group of people and the like virtual like cheers when we got the confirmation of successful landing came through. So that was a very memorable event. So, and there's been a few memorable tea time instances too, which again those are the very casual things, and those have very fluctuate wildly depending on just who's there and whatnot. But sometimes we get a large group of people and some interesting discussions happen. And it's cool to have people from around the world kind of talk about the same like science subjects that are happening. That are actively going on. So yeah, I think those are probably the most memorable because it involved like a lot of people. It was kind of surreal to realize that I had at least a small hand in helping those events happen. Like the Perseverance rover, that one was almost entirely Spirit. It's the same one who made the Cosmos World. He was the one who actually put a lot of that together and that event together. But it was still kind of cool to be part of that. So yeah, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head as like a major, as like a big thing. There's been lots of little things along the way.
Okay. So question harking back to more towards the beginning days, you mentioned like the questions you'd let people ask. What have been some of the more common ones you would ask along during those early stages of VRChat?
So the common ones, do you want me to answer them too? Because they were usually astronomy themed questions.
Sure, let's go.
But well, see, maybe when we think about it, because I'd also get some common minor joke troll questions when people, if people didn't think I was being serious. The most common probably being, do you think the Earth is flat? Which, an extra bit of joke because of my hair.
Oh, wow. Oh, man. You know how many times I've used that line? Hey, it's okay. The world is flat like a pancake. Yeah, everybody just falls off the edge. Oh, my gumminy criminy. Oh, boy.
Yeah, that was a very common one to get, usually as a joke. Actually, to be honest, I think I'm lucky in that I'm pretty sure I've never met a real flat earther. I've met people who I could tell they're being ironic. It's ironic. I can kind of tell when it's an ironic, funny thing. I'm pretty sure I've never met a serious one. Anyway, that was a common thing. Common actual questions, though. I would always get questions, usually whatever the big subject thing that in the moment was. Common stuff would be black hole questions. Anything to do with black holes? would be the questions asked. I'd also get asked about exoplanet stuff, relatively common too. And for context, and I find both of those kind of funny to me that those would keep coming up. I understand why. Those are very interesting subjects to the general public. They pop up in popular science. But the funny thing to me is I don't actually do research on black holes, and I don't do research on exoplanets. I've studied them. It's part of my degree is having to know generally, to a much higher extent than the general public, what's happening in these fields, but it's not what I research. And I rarely ever got asked questions that actually had threads tied to my own research, which I'm slightly sad about because it is an interesting thing. But those would be, I think, the most common questions. I would also get asked a lot on what I define as like a separate field that's not under astronomy, and I call space exploration, which is different than astronomy and astrophysics. So questions about what do you think of the Falcon 9 or SpaceX stuff or SLS or manned missions to the moon. That falls under the umbrella of space exploration, which is not really under the astronomy umbrella. Like, I have almost zero professional connections or networking that has anything to do with rocketry. I have a lot of personal connections because the undergrad school that I went to, a lot of my friends are aerospace engineers and do work with rockets and such. But that's kind of like, I have those personal connections. Those connections have nothing to do with me as an astronomer. But people would ask those. I think because generally they think, well, astronomy is space, rockets are space. Ask astronomer about rockets. I don't blame them. That's kind of a perception that's perpetuated by the greater like media presence of when space is talked about. They'll put astronomers in the same articles about rocket stuff. And in some cases that winds up being true of like space telescope launches. But even in those cases, like astronomers have nothing to do with the launch. We have a lot to do about the telescope design, but not the launch vehicle. That's the engineers.
Yep.
And so usually, if it was a question that I kind of could answer just from my own personal nerdiness about rockets, sometimes I would, but add the clarifier, like, this does not come from me being an astronomer, this just comes from me being a nerd. I guess I realize you're already a nerd if you're doing astronomy, but whatever. Or a lot of times I would just be like, you have to ask an engineer. Luckily, one of the founders of the group actually has finished his degree in engineering and does care about a lot of rocket stuff. So if he was there in the instance, I would usually be like, go talk to the engineer. So I'd get asked those a lot too. But that I would say that's. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. You have the floor. Go ahead. Keep going. I can ask my question when you're done.
So even though like I'd get a lot of those questions about black holes or exoplanets, that was probably only like 30% of the questions. It was a plurality of the questions, but not a full majority because there's a lot of different subjects and topics. Oh, I forgot. There is one more thing I would get asked very common. I think I forgot about it because it got old fast. Aliens. I would always get asked about my thoughts on aliens. Would be a common thing, and I have a whole spiel that I would do because of the way people would phrase it. They would ask, "What do you think about aliens, or do you think aliens exist?" People always ask the question like that. My response is usually along the lines of, "That's actually 3 different questions. That's not one question. That's 3 different questions. And I don't know which one you're actually asking." So then I would explain all 3. So sometimes people mean, do you think aliens have visited Earth? The UFO stuff. And my answer is no. And there's more I could go into on that. But usually the simple answer is, nah, they haven't done that. If people were a little less trolly, they might be a bit more serious and asking the question of, what do I think life exists in general in the galaxy or in the universe? That answer would be yes, and there's no argument about like probability of life being produced. But again, it's just a guess. Or actually, yeah, that would be the third question. And then the middle question is if they'd ask about intelligent life. So life in general in the universe, answer is like, I'm pretty sure. Other intelligent life in the universe, my answer is probably. But the real answer is, for at least those last two, is we just don't know. The aliens visiting Earth stuff, though, I just say that's just a no. But for the other two, the real answer is, well, we don't know. Anyway, I'd get asked that constantly, and it did get old after a while.
Ah, you can see why that would get old, talking about aliens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
Hmm.
But my question for you and everything else is like this. Are you a Star Wars fan or a Trekkie fan?
Well, let's see. I've always found I have to navigate this question carefully. Some people have very strong opinions.
Oh yeah,
very strong opinions of it.
Yep.
So, here? Actually, I will answer by asking my own question. Or I'll ask for a clarifier on this. Are you asking which do I prefer as sci-fi, or which do I prefer in general?
In general.
In general, I would choose Star Trek in general, but it's very close. It's a very close thing for me. And for because Star Wars is great. I like Star Wars. I just have a lot more of a nostalgia factor for Star Trek. So it beats out Star Wars just a little bit more in the general sense.
I got you. Cool.
Okay.
No.
But I get it when people. Maybe they prefer Star Wars for narrative or story reasons or whatever. I do stand by the fact that Star Trek is the far superior sci-fi, mostly in the sense of the fact that I do not think Star Wars is sci-fi. It's science fantasy or space opera, which is a different genre than science fiction, I would argue.
Okay. Oh, so
it's like comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah, I can see that. They are very different. One has like glorified science magic, and the other uses technology. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like the reason goes a bit more towards not even necessarily like how they present the stuff. It's more the story structure, right? Star Wars is a classic. It's like an opera. It's a space opera, telling a grand story of good and evil. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good story. Sci-fi in my mind usually always pushes on like hard humanity questions where it's trying to do a lot of subtle question things. Not that space opera can't do that. Also, you can have a whole debate on the exact specifics of it, but if you've seen both Star Trek and Star Wars, then you might get what I'm trying to get to. I don't know how else to communicate it.
I can understand that. So, a question I have for you is next is going to be something a bit more personal. What drew you to astronomy, Mask, and what were you expecting going into it in college initially?
Well, let's see. Like a lot of kids, I had a fascination with space as a little kid. I watched the original Carl Sagan Cosmos when I was really little too, and I think that was a major inspiration to me. It also helped that I had family who was very supportive of me being in general in science and such. Although I actually almost did engineering. There's a reason why I have there's a rocket nerd hidden inside, even though I don't have any professional connection. I almost did pursue engineering. So in high school, I thought I was going to do aerospace engineering. But that mostly actually came down from an aspect of I didn't understand how one became an astronomer. It was something that was kind of nebulous to me. And high school counselors, they don't understand academia at all. They can answer that as well. The standard answer they give is like, oh, in engineering, it puts you on jobs, and we want our students to have good jobs, and so that's what they pointed me to. But I had an extra couple advantages. One, my dad had an astronomy bachelor's. He wound up not being a professional astronomer. He became an engineer. But he had some background knowledge in like academic level astronomy, not necessarily in the actual material. I had plenty of that from other sources and such too, and he had done it way back in the 80s. But that like understanding of like how do college departments work, and having like advice from my own family about college wound up being very, very useful. And so my first semester in undergrad, where I had entered into a program called a degree called engineering physics, basically where it's a combo physics degree, engineering degree. 'Cause, again, I thought I wanted to do engineering, but I was really fascinated with astronomy and space. I just didn't really push it because I didn't really understand how you would go from that into like it being a career. I had it planted in me for so long from high school and such that like the whole point of going to college was do something so you get job, so that you make money. But I had great professors that first semester who explains to everyone kind of like what the general path was, and if someone was interested in an astronomy career, how that worked. And once it was demystified for me, I was like, okay, now I'm gonna do that. That's what I actually want to do. Since it was first semester and I was already in the physical science, I was already in the physics department. I didn't have to do a department switch. It was quite easy for me to just switch, and it didn't affect my schooling at all, doing that switch at all. And I haven't looked back since. Did that, graduated undergrad with an astronomy astrophysics degree, applied to grad school for PhD programs, got into grad school, and have been a grad student ever since. Although that's almost done very soon, hopefully, fingers crossed that I don't screw that up. So yeah, that's kind of the path and motivation. Was just I've just always been really interested in it, and I think another key aspect, this is something that's maybe not important for people who are just curious, but can be important for people who are considering something like grad school or they want to know more. I think a key thing for me was not being fixed. Like once that fixation was broken for me on like, oh, I need to go to college to get a degree so that I could get a job, and it turned more into like, well, I'm doing this because I want to learn, and like I want to actually study this just for the studying its sake. That made like it way easier for me, because I don't know. For me, the nice thing about about academia and grad school is the fact that like I don't know, at a personal level, and this is a me thing, I don't think I would do very well just working in a standard like corporate environment. And grad school is kind of a way for me not to do that and to do what I like, even though the pay is crap. You do not go into academia to make money. But
okay. So you mentioned earlier you weren't asked a lot of questions based on your specialty, what you research. Ask what that is, and how'd you stumble upon it?
Sure. I'll explain what it is first, and I'll explain how I got into it.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm trying to think though how to describe this, how to crunch this down. Because otherwise I could spend an entire dissertation defense talking about it, because I'm going to be doing that in a few months. So how do I talk about it without doing that?
Oh no, how terrible. Long conversation on a show dedicated to talking. How terrible.
Well, I don't have plots and figures to show. But okay.
He needs charts. We need charts. You got to go from A to B and get back to C. Gotcha. I understand how that
So here's the longer elevator pitch form of it. So the subfield of what I do is called galactic archaeology.
Okay.
So the best way to probably explain galactic archaeology is to put it in the context of other astronomy fields that people might have some passing familiarity with. I like to describe it in terms of physical and time scales. So on the largest ends, you have cosmology. Cosmology is the stuff when you hear anyone talk about the Big Bang or the early universe, and the formation of atoms and so on, or dark energy stuff. That's cosmology, which is the largest scales of the universe on the longest time frames of the universe. As you go down from cosmology, then you start to enter the realm of galaxies, because that's what makes up the largest scale structure. The largest scale structures in the universe are the strands of dark matter and such, but clumps around them, what you can see are the galaxies that form into these different filaments. You see all these galaxies and galaxy clusters. Zoom in further, you can look at these groups of galaxies and different galaxies. Zoom further, or zoom closer in, but also probably closer to home because of observational constraints. We start looking at stuff like our own galaxy and the stars inside in our local environment as a galaxy. That is where I reside, is in galactic archaeology. But to put it in a further context when we go further, so you go from like galactic scale, the Milky Way galaxy, to stuff like the gas between the stars, and then down to individual stars, and then you reach a field that's probably really famous to the general public, which is exoplanet stuff. You look at how planets are forming around these individual stars. On a galactic level, you don't look at exoplanets because there's not enough samples. The sample size is very low. It's very hard to observe those. So exoplanet people are looking at much smaller scales and smaller time scales too. I mean, it's still long time scales, but it's not 10 billion years. It's more like a few hundred million years. The Earth is several billion years old, but what exoplanet people tend to study is they study forming stars that are forming planets. And the formation process for planets is in the scale of 10 to 100 million years. So I reside in that middle ground of looking at the Milky Way galaxy and the immediate surroundings of the Milky Way galaxy. So that's the size scale. But to actually explain the name galactic archaeology, have to think about what questions we would ask about the galaxy. So some questions are, well, how did the galaxy form? What's happened in the 10 billion years since the galaxy has formed? Turns out quite a bit. If you can answer those questions about the Milky Way, and it's one of the nice things about studying the Milky Way is since we're embedded inside it, you can measure a lot of properties very nicely, very easily, because they're close. Looking at other galaxies, you can't resolve individual stars. It's very hard to do that. So if you can answer these questions for the Milky Way, you can make some very good educated assumptions about how galaxies form in general by knowing how the Milky Way formed. And that can help answer stuff in the cosmology side because you kind of working your way up. You can also work yourself down because understanding the history of the galaxy and star formation in the galaxy might tell you something about planet population statistics too. So there's a lot to learn in this subfield, and the way to do it, because we can't turn back the clock and watch the galaxy go through history. Many people have probably heard about the fact that, you look further away from Earth, you're looking back into time. So if we're looking further out into the galaxy, you should be looking back into time. And while that's true, the size of the Milky Way galaxy is about 100,000 light years. So you're only looking back about 100,000 years when you look at the other side of the galaxy. But the time scale it takes for things to move in the galaxy are in the 100 million years. So that look back time looking across the galaxy, not enough. You're basically, as far as galaxy, time scale of the galaxy is concerned, we see the whole galaxy in one moment in time. By galactic standards of time scale, at least. So if you want to know what happened in the past, you can only look at the traces left in the present. So just like an archaeologist might dig into the ground and find present-day artifacts, little samples of things around, and you have to reconstruct what probably happened, we look for the chemical and dynamics being the motion of stars. We look for the signatures of past events in the current stars. So it's almost like we're doing archaeology on the galaxy, galactic archaeology.
Wow.
And to answer the how I got into that field, it was mostly by accident. Like many grad students, grad student experiences vary wildly. But my own personal experience as a grad student was coming into grad school not really sure exactly what I wanted to study. I knew what I didn't want to study. I didn't want to do exoplanets. And cosmology was a bit too large or too simulation based for me. Not enough observational component where you're actually collecting real data. I like lots of data, big data. And like a lot of people in the turn of the decade, 2020 era, machine learning was the big buzzword. So I was interested in that. And so my advisor, who is connected with this project called the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which that could be a whole discussion, but all you really need to know is it's a survey, so it collects a lot of data on stars and with a focus on stars in the Milky Way for galactic archaeology purposes. He gave me a little pet project of because I was a first year grad student, didn't want anything super serious yet because I'm supposed to be learning how to do research. He gave me a little bit of a pet project of try to use machine learning tools on a problem of distances, basically improving our measurements of distances of stars using spectra, which is what the survey produced. Spectra basically being like you break light into the rainbow and you see the colors and there's different line elements, basically that. And that pet project evolved over the past 5 years and has basically, it's much bigger and there's a lot more to it now, but I'm still doing that mostly because I wound up finding it kind of interesting and I stuck with it. There's a few other reasons for sticking with it too. I like sitting in the middle of many different subfields. Because that's the nice thing about galactic archaeology. You can talk a lot with some of the exoplanet people. I talk a lot with a group called Astroseismology. That's a whole other ballgame. But I talk a lot with that community. Of course, the galactic archaeology community itself. And the actual project, my actual dissertation is on the ages of stars. So for galactic archaeology, you want to look at the chemical signatures and such. But one of the things you would really like to have is if you know how old different groups of stars are in the Milky Way, then you can pin an exact date. Or, well, it's not exactly an exact date, but you can get some sense of, this chemical change happened this long ago, right? So you can build a timeline. But to do that, you need the ages of stars. So that's what I work on, is estimating the ages of stars to some uncertainty bounds. In fact, half of my dissertation isn't actually about getting the ages, it's getting the uncertainties on the age estimations. But that's a story for, I guess, a dissertation defense, not necessarily a podcast.
Fair enough. Well, would you mind explaining the differences between the two just a little bit without going into it a whole lot, I guess?
I'm curious. Which two?
The ages and the dissertations of the difference.
So the short summary is, I guess one context saying is stellar ages are hard. They're very hard. It's probably one of the hardest properties of a star to determine. So there are many different techniques that work on different kinds of stars, and that's one big issue is the fact there's no one way to do it for all of them. There's some techniques that work really well for what are called evolved stars. These are stars that are currently actively dying, or they're going to die relatively soon on a stellar timescale. You have some processes that work on supermassive main sequence stars. Stars like the sun are extremely hard to get the age of. We know the age of the sun. We estimated the age of the sun after we had estimated the age of the Earth. So there's a little fun fact, because determining the age of a main sequence star like the sun is very, very hard. But even for the areas we can get an age, my particular work is in what are in those evolved stars. Those are actively dying. The ways to get the ages, there's two main ways. One's more precise than the other. So the one that's really precise, I mentioned before, is called astroseismology. That would be a whole discussion to talk about how that works. But the super, super, super basic is starquakes. Seismology, just like seismographs on the Earth, stars have starquakes, and just like earthquakes gave us information about the core of the Earth. As the waves pass through the Earth, you can figure out the internal structure. That's how the internal structure of the Earth was figured out. Quakes on stars carry information about the lower layers, and you can reconstruct how old the star must be. Well, you can reconstruct stuff like the mass of the star, and then using the mass and a few other things, you can make a guess on the age to about 10-12% uncertainty. So to put that in context, if astroseismology says that a star is 5 billion years old, then the uncertainties on that are plus or minus like 500 million years. But astroseismology has a main problem where you can only do it for a very, very small number of stars. It requires observing a single star for a very long time. Basically time sequence. You have to watch it continuously. And you have very, very high sensitivity limitations. You got to be very, very sensitive to tiny brightness changes. In fact, the only missions that do that at scale are actually exoplanet missions, because they stare at stars for a very long time looking for a planet to pass in front. But in the meantime, it's collecting a lot of data about the brightness of that star at very high precision. But the numbers, we're talking tens of thousands of stars. But when we're talking about something like structures in the Milky Way is much, much bigger. And those 10,000 stars instance that we have from astroseismology is also relatively close to the Earth. But if you want to estimate ages for different parts of the disk, or closer to the galactic center, or in this thing called the halo, astroseismology is not going to help you. Maybe you'll get 1 or 2 stars, and that'll be it. Not enough. So instead, you can use a method of looking at the chemical compositions of the star, because there are a few elements in stars that can trace the mass of a star. Especially once it's become an evolved giant. Basically, it's stopped being a main sequence. It enters the end stages of life. This is where the star begins to swell into a red giant. So you can trace the mass of those stars with the chemistry. And a nice little quirk about stars moving off into the giant branch is stars only exist as a red giant for 1 to 10% of their lifespan. So something like the sun has around a 10 billion year lifespan. It will spend a few 100 million years as a red giant, and then it's going to be actually dead. And so that's one key thing for how we're going to get the age from the mass. The other key thing is the lifespan of a star is determined by the mass. So, a star that has the same mass as the sun, and the same metallicity and other stuff, but that's besides the point. Basic point is the same mass as the sun, will have roughly a 10 billion year lifespan. So if you see a star that is a red giant, and you can measure we actually look specifically at the ratio of carbon to nitrogen. If you look at that ratio and you make an estimation that, this is about a 1 solar mass star, that's a red giant. Well, if it's a 1 solar mass star, it has a lifespan of about 10 billion years, but it's also a red giant, so it must be about 10 billion years old. It's at the end stage of its life. You know the age now. That whole process of getting that mass from the chemistry, it's quite incredible that it works at all. But there's an incredible amount of spread and scatter and uncertainty in that relation. So you might get like, oh, the mass is 1 solar mass, but it's plus or minus a few tenths of a solar mass. And unfortunately, the way that the scaling works is that a few tenths of a solar mass can mean the difference between a 10 billion year lifespan or a 5 billion year lifespan. That's a pretty big difference when you're talking about the age of the galaxy, when you're talking about ages in the galaxy. So one thing that has not been done super well, until I'd like to say until now, is getting a good estimation of what the uncertainties are. If you make those guesses, you do like, oh, here's the CNN, here's what the age of the star is. Those methods all rely on scatter. This is going to get a little bit in statistics. I'll try to simplify or crunch this down. But you rely heavily on just going, okay, well, other stars that had the same chemistry had this range of masses, right? They didn't all have actually, like one solar mass just happens to be the average, right? It's the mean, the average one. But there was actually quite a bit of scatter. But your only good reference for that scatter is to look at the thing that you might be calibrating against. Because how do we know this carbon and nitrogen associates to this massive star? You have to have a fixed point, a calibration source for that. Well, it turns out we have astroseismology. That's super precise method from before that only does a few 10,000 stars. Well, you can use those tens of thousands of stars as the calibration source for your chemistry, because once you do that and you do ages through chemistry, you're not getting ages for tens of thousands of stars. You're getting it for 500,000 stars.
Oh.
And potentially in the next few years, up to 1 million stars. Way bigger sample size that's spread out more in the galaxy. But if you just estimate your uncertainties, how uncertain you are purely off of the seismology, what you wind up getting as your answer for the uncertainties winds up just being around the astroseismic uncertainty, because the thing you're calibrating with also has an uncertainty. So you have this weird blending, and it hasn't really been deblended very well. So that's been one of the things I've been trying to pursue. I've been trying to pursue it in a way that like to get a little bit more nitty-gritty on the dissertation. I've been trying to pursue it in a way that is scalable. So I had entered in with this interest in machine learning. I had done myself my own stellar age estimations basically you have a data set with a calibration or training set, so this is the machine learning people would call it. Training set of astroseismology, and you have chemistry input, bottom main. You make something that guesses a mass based off of your input chemistry. But your standard neural networks, an artificial neural network, the basis of machine learning, is just a fancy interpolator. It's just a fancy way of drawing a line through a scatter plot. That's all it is, right? It just does a lot more linear algebra, which can make that fit a little bit more complicated, but it's still just essentially a fit to a scatter plot. So the thing I pursued was doing basically it came from this question of like, well, okay, can I instead of modeling doing just a fit to the data, can I fit a distribution of the data? Because if you can understand that distribution, that scatter, into a model, and that makes the predictions, you can have that same model not just give you the mean estimation, but it can tell you what the actual scatter looked like, the shape of it looked like. Including also the uncertainty. Well, like it can take into account the uncertainties in that distribution in all of the parameters, right? Not just the astroseismic, but also the chemistry has its own parameters. Like these are real measurements that themselves have uncertainties, and you can incorporate all of those in. So I did this thing using a really basic type of generative model. It's called normalizing flows. But really, all it is something that stretches and squeezes a simple distribution to model something more complicated, like the relation that I care about. So no, I'm not going to make any claims about being fancy AI. It's just fits. In this case, I'm not fitting the line. I'm fitting the distribution, and with that, the distribution that it fits actually indicates some information about what the scatter of the data was per star, because some parts of, like, some stars, the relation might be tighter than other stars. If you just do a flat comparison astroseismology, you're not gonna capture that that nuance. With my method, you kind of do. So I have a paper that I is about to be submitted to journal with this, and my half my dissertation's on it. The other half of my dissertation's the stuff I wrote a few years ago. So kind of a complicated discussion. I'm still working on how to simplify that down. That's the basic gist.
Okay.
I don't think of it as super complicated. I mean, there's some complicated stuff under the hood, but the fundamental basics is there's relations between the chemistry and the age of the star. You can model the distribution of that relation, and using that distribution, you can make an estimation on new stars, give it the chemistry, what the distribution look like in your test set, your training set, and that gives you a rough idea of probably what age it is, and even some idea of how uncertain the model is on what that age is. Which is incredibly important because astronomers and scientists care a lot about uncertainties. You want to know, like, oh, I say this is this old, this population is this old, how sure am I on that? Maybe you see two bumps in a population, two different age populations. If your uncertainties are very large, how do you know there's actually two different distribution? How do you know there's actually like two bumps? It might just be blurred together. If you have if your uncertainties are smaller than the difference between the two bumps, that indicates that, oh, this is probably real. It's not some weird observational thing. This is a real measurement. And, you know, that's the difference between successfully submitting a paper that actually we learned something versus, oh, no, I had to retract something because we got it wrong. Or issuing a correction or something, yeah.
So I've got two questions. One's going to seem a little simpleton. The other is, I don't know. But the first one being is, what is a starquake? Because I've never heard the term before. And I'll start with that before I lead into the next one. Hello, the last time I saw you here, Novid, was October.
Yeah, absolutely. That ghost ship was definitely something, to say the least. But we're here now.
Here to tell you something amazing. Right now, PJKT application is open on May 12th. So if you go right down the description, which will give you to a Discord, discord.gg/PJKT. You'll have all the information you need to sign up for your community, your creators. We're open to communities, creators, and people are building things, and content creators as well. Everything is right down in the Discord, right for you. What else do we have here? What is PJKT, Novid?
Well, PJKT is a virtual convention here in VRChat that holds many different types of events within Project Fest, from film showcases with Project Lens, from developer talks with Project Inc., as well as many live performances and many different events held by the community through our events applications forums as well. It'll also be down in that Discord, discord.gg/PJKT. So, of course, make sure to go check it out.
Most definitely. And PJKT this year is going to be June 27th through July 7th. So mark it down in your calendars. We'd love to see you there. See you this summer, folks.
So a starquake, so stars are big balls of plasma, right? They're hot gas, a lot of hot gas. Ionized hot gas, that's a plasma. You know, with an energy source at the center. Which, another fun thing, the whole star is not doing fusion. Fusion only occurs in the center of the star, in the core of the star. The rest of it's just hot plasma. So, for a star to have a starquake, you need basically some sort of energy source. Now if we look at Earth, let's go to geoseismology, I guess, or just plain seismology. The energy source for a lot of waves is, in some geologists is probably going to get very mad at me for not saying this correctly, but I'm not a geologist. But the general thing that happens is you have a lot of energy is stored in tectonic plate motions or just inside the plates in the crust. And then that energy can build up to the point where and then suddenly releases, right? And that energy is released from a single point that then radiates through, right? And we feel the ground shake as those waves pass through. Stars can have multiple different driving mechanisms, though. They can be quite a bit more complicated. So the main seismology that I have a connection with, so the stuff that works for these evolved giants, they come from these like cyclic processes inside the star, where and we call these solar type oscillations. I can't remember what the connection is to them being called solar type, other than I think maybe they were first observed in the sun, and then when observed in other stars, they just got called, oh, they're like the ones in the sun, so they're solar type oscillators. Anyway, we're not great at naming things. So you have cycles of where the star will have a little bit extra energy output, or it'll heat up because it's compressed in a little, gravity's compressed it in, and so you have this energy increase. And in the star, because the energy is increased, the star reacts by expanding a little bit. When it expands a little bit, the surface area increases. With a higher surface area, the luminosity bumps up a little bit. But now it's expanded and it cools off a little bit. So it's cooled off and so it shrinks a little bit more. And it gets dimmer. The surface area is going down. It gets dimmer. And now it heats up and it will basically do this driving process. It will do that. The exact details of how that driving process works, I'm actually not super familiar with, because I myself am not an astroseismologist. That's the general gist. And these like waves, these oscillations, they wind up being like whole surface, like the whole surface is moving, or they can happen at different points. So there's almost like a standing wave in the star. So it's not unlike on the Earth where it's like you pluck it, right, and the waves ripple through. It's more like a wave that's constantly there. It's a standing wave. If anyone's familiar with like standing sound waves, for instance, it's like that, but on a spherical geometry. You get more extreme versions of that in what's called the instability strip, where those pulsations will get much bigger, and to the point where you can actually almost quite see them naked eye. Even small telescope binoculars, and you observe the star for long enough, like over several nights, and you have a good memory of what it looked like, you actually can kind of see these stars like, it's dimmer today than it was like a week ago. They can change that much. The biggest one, the most famous ones are the Cepheids. That's their name from long ago, like 100. They were first noticed like over 100 years ago. So astroseismology is actually older than one might think. But the connection between oscillations and stuff, or that there were other kinds of oscillations that happened so relatively recently. So that kind of a roundabout way, I guess, of describing star quakes. Stars don't usually have they don't have sudden rapid changes like in one spot that spreads across. It's usually these like standing pulsations that slowly change over time as the star evolves. Sometimes stars will have weird patterns in the pulsations, usually due to like stuff like magnetic field effects and rotation stuff, and that's the sort of stuff that astroseismologists love to study, because seismology, like with the sun, you can observe the magnetic field interactions directly. You can actually see the filaments. But on the stars, I mean, it's just a point. It's a single dot in the sky. You can't see that. But the pulsations, some of the magnetic fields affect the pulsations, and so you can tease out some information about what's happening to these different stars. So they love doing that. Getting the ages and such is something that's been propped up a lot by the galactic archaeology community because it's very useful for us.
Okay. So the next question I have is, how would one traditionally find this information, especially the stuff that you alluded to that you are studying, do traditionally before machine learning and AI, and how has AI and machine learning improve on what you do after?
So I'm going to start off answering this by expressly talking about the fact that no one that I know yet is using what anyone would call, rightly or wrongly, AI. Like I said, I much prefer to think about in terms of like the older term of machine learning, because that's more associated with, at least in my mind, of what it really is. It's just really fancy interpolations, and you can just be very clever about it. Like maybe instead of fitting a line, you fit a distribution. But in the end, you're interpolating something, right? You have this huge training set, and you're kind of finding the average fit to that set. That's all it is. But there have been some very clever and very interesting uses across astronomy for machine learning stuff. And it's really field dependent. I really don't think there's not really a one size fit all machine learning thing in astronomy at all. There's some attempts to kind of do that. So like I was actually at a conference this past summer that was all about like the present and future of AI, but I don't know, thinking machine learning stuff, in astronomy. And I found it really interesting because I've never been to a conference like that before, because most conferences usually have a kind of a more of a theme on the science subject, but this was more of a methods conference. The way we think about it is that it's a method, it's an analysis tool that is applied to a lot of different fields. So it was interesting to see the different clever ways that it's been applied. And there's some division. Another thing I learned there is there's some division in the astronomy community about how to think about and approach AI/machine learning. You have the more restrained group, which I guess I would say includes myself, which views it as like the way to think about it is as an analysis tool. You have a problem, you have a big toolbox of analysis stuff. It's a new tool in the toolbox, or it's at least a genre of tools in the toolbox. And the way to approach the use is from a science first standpoint of like, you have some question, you have something you want to figure out. You kind of know what you know some of the physics, or maybe you don't. You need to talk to theorists who work out the physics. And AI can't help you with that. But it can help you with maybe the data fits, or maybe identifying interesting samples. A big thing in astronomy right now is with object classification. So the sort of stuff where it's like the machine learning or / AI isn't teaching you anything physics, but it's highlighting like, hey, in this massive data set that you never have any hope of being able to look through with human eyes in a very long time, this group of stars is different in this way from this group of stars. It can't tell you why. It has no clue why. It just knows, it's different. Maybe you should look at it. And that has proven very useful. And there has been big science advances, especially in galactic archaeology specifically, from that. But there's also the subgroup who are more, I guess, AI focused or AI first focused. That's not really fair to say. But they think about it more in terms of like, what can we do with the tools? I guess if I'm going to be a little degrading to them, they're the people who have a hammer and are looking everywhere for more nails to hit with the hammer. But that's not entirely fair. There's some interesting thoughts in that group, but they're the ones that are interested in taking like large language models and like teaching it on a bunch of the literature and seeing what it spits out. Which, I mean, fair enough. If they want to try it, they can try it. I'm just not convinced that you'll find anything come out of it yet. and there's going to be a whole discussion of why that's the case. Large language models are really fascinating, and it's really incredible what they can do. But there are limitations. I'm sure a lot of people who have toyed around with large language models have noticed many of the limitations. And I do think, as of right now, you can't make an artificial astronomer. Maybe that'll change in the future. Maybe that'll change close into the future. I don't know. The field is moving so fast. AI stuff's moving, or at least large language model stuff is moving so fast. But there are some very fundamental things that it has to overcome that it has not demonstrated ability to do. A big one is a fundamental understanding, an intuitive fundamental understanding of physics. I've not seen a single thing that's ever indicated a large language model actually has an understanding of physics. Like, it can repeat, it can make a guess of, like, if you ask it a problem, and it can kind of associate words together of, like, oh, this sort of problem has an answer that looks like this. But does that mean it actually knows the physics? Let's say you ask it a physics question that does not have an answer, and you just give it a bunch of data. I'm not convinced it will ever give you anything useful. It will just kind of spit out what's been done. It's not going to make something... It's not going to be able to come up with something very fundamentally new, because it's limited by the fact that it is only trained on what we already know. So how can it come up with something new? Because understanding fundamental new physics, really fundamental physics changes aren't necessarily really going to come from just mashing together other ideas. Sometimes that happens where you approach a problem from a new direction. But all that could really tell you is that, oh, there's something interesting here. But to actually put together a understanding about it, though, I don't think it can do that. Not yet.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a full tangent away. I think from the spirit of your question, but I feel like it was something important to say.
No, I appreciate the insights, and I'm never gonna. I always encourage tangents and runoffs. It's how Raptor and I learn things a lot of the time. So please don't ever apologize or feel like that's a bad thing. When people go off on tangents, like we talked to the gentleman a while ago who works in a band, Opal Metro, went on a tangent on AI for a while as well, and it's not something we discourage. We actually encourage it quite a lot, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the scientific community has a lot in common with this distrust of AI stuff, along with the artistic community as well. Anyway, though, as far as like real use cases, though, in astronomy for, let's limit down to the machine learning I've talked about before, real use cases. It has changed a lot, and it's going to be very important into the future, along with other data analysis tools that probably don't fall under the machine learning. Machine learning is just a buzzword that gets all the attention. There's other analysis tools we use. But it's probably been one of the fastest developing. That's really important to the future, because the future of astronomy, like of all our other fields, is large data sets. Although, unlike some stuff like Google or like tech companies or whatever, the reason we have large data sets is purely from a space is big. There's a lot of stuff in space. And if you really want to try and understand the physics of some of the stuff, there's been plenty of times where new physics was hiding in between the data points, I guess is a paraphrase, not quite literally, but like, if you have a small enough sample, it's hard to see the structure or something. If you get to large samples, you can start to see patterns and such. But you're also reaching large sample sizes to the point where it starts getting very, very hard to do a lot of traditional analysis techniques. And so machine learning's proved very useful because of its speed. But there's a balance, and it's a cost-benefit thing. So one reason I defend the potential use, at least as of right now, of machine learning with stellar ages is that, one, it's a fundamentally data-driven calibration. We do not have a full physics model that can fully explain a star's chemistry, the mixing chemistry that occurs that creates this relation I've talked about of the mass relation. It's not been fully created in models and theoretical models and simulations. At least not to the point where it matches well enough to be able to just go, oh, we have theoretical models of how a star works and use that to connect a star's age. There's still some underlying physics that's not fully figured out. But at the same time, those stellar ages are very useful for people who are doing stuff beyond just the internals of a star. It's very useful for the archaeology, so we really want those. So having a large data calibrated relation where it's just empirical, it's okay, we can't fully figure out the exact reasons of why this works, but it's still very useful. And it's such a large data set. There's enough training size, and you're doing it to a lot of stars. Machine learning becomes a viable, there's a viable motivation for wanting to explore using machine learning for it, because machine learning is just fundamentally empirically calibrated fits of data, and so it makes sense of doing. When we hopefully have much better theoretical models on the internal mixings of a star, where we can actually start to really match the chemistry of these stars that we're seeing, and we can get a better understanding of the scatter from a physical point of view, the need to do a machine learning approach to ages will go away, because it'll be more physics driven, which is much more preferred. But right now we don't have that, so insert machine learning as a tool. That's an example for machine learning being very useful in that at least as a what's the word that the CS people like to use, supervised, for a supervised model. Another good case of supervised models in astronomy, where you just train on data sets, is classification stuff, where it's just there's so much, and it's something that's classically very hard to do from a standard computer science point of view. Here, a great example is galaxy classification. Here's an image of some galaxy. Different galaxies have different structures and looks. We categorize them. This has been a thing. Galaxy categorization has been a thing for almost 100 years now. First created by Edwin Hubble, and or I think he was the first to really push it. But anyway, about 100 years. But now we have the number of galaxies we have images for is just growing and growing and growing and growing. It's just going to grow so much faster. It would take an army of grad students just staring at images all day to figure it out. So or to get through the data set fast enough. So a project started, I think it's over 10 years old now. It's called Galaxy Zoo, and it was a citizen science initiative. So the idea was that people would they wanted to do this new fancy thing, machine learning, to do the image recognition, to be able to categorize. But they need a large enough training set, and the training set was not big enough, because it's just the growth, the number of galaxies we had was exponential. So this group created Galaxy Zoo with the idea that you ask the general public. You have people log in, anyone can log in, and it'll quickly show you here's different categorizations, what the different categorizations look like, or describe this galaxy. Does it have arms? Does it have bars? Are the arms really tight or loose? The various things that would go into these classifications. And you just ask the general public, and then just throw it out into the world. Each galaxy would probably get seen by a bunch of different people, right? So you would average out across people, and it was quite popular, actually. A lot of people would apparently love to just hop into Galaxy Zoo and just procrastinate whatever they needed to do by sitting and categorizing galaxies, because it was kind of it was kind of mini gamified, slightly gamified, and categorize this and this, and so it's been building this giant training set. It's a point where now it's actually possible for these machine learning tools to look at images, little cut out images of galaxies and be able to just start classifying them, which is going to be very important in the next like 5 years, with the new generation of ground observatories that are going to produce absolute bucket loads of galaxy images, which probably would even overwhelm what Galaxy Zoo is able to produce. So hence this need to make this trained model, and it's not quite the level of like knowing galaxy classifications doesn't directly feed into physics understanding, but there's a lot of stuff you can do with it. The big one is like probably population stuff. You can get some idea, a census, right, of the local universe, of what do galaxies tend to do. That's quite important for the extragalactic people and just galaxy stuff in general. But yeah, that's another example. And the final example I want to give is unsupervised. So this is like clustering algorithms. Like you just feed a data set and you see what it says. The really big one, and this actually made, at least in the astronomy community, made waves, was about 8 years ago, the discovery of what's called Gaia Enceladus, which is a dwarf galaxy. And the key thing about Gaia Enceladus is it's a dwarf galaxy with no structure. It has no structure because we ate it. It's part of the Milky Way. But the thing is, when the galaxy eats another galaxy, like imagine this is the plane of the galaxy, and the dwarf galaxy falls in. It will fall in, and it gets stretched. The stars get stretched apart. Like the individual ones aren't, but like the stars are separated out. The dwarf galaxy will make a few passes, and then eventually its stars are just merged into the Milky Way. But the momentum of the stars and the gas that made that dwarf galaxy is not just deleted, right? It's part of the Milky Way now. And so you'll find a lot of those stars are in orbits around the galaxy that are quite different than the stars that were originally part of the galaxy. Stars originally part of the galaxy generally follow the disk. They move in the plane. But you'll see these stars that are moving in this like wonky, like weird processing motions. And 10 years ago, this satellite called Gaia was launched as a ESA mission, so European Space Agency mission, that measured the positions of stars in the sky, and more importantly, their motion. So it would try to figure out how far away a star is through the parallax effect. As Earth goes around the sun, stars that are closer would appear to move a bit more than stars further away. Same effect if you stick your arm out in VR. VR is nice for this. And close one eye, open the other eye, you see your thumb will move relative to the background. Same idea. You just need a nice large baseline, like the Earth going around the sun. Stars move very small amounts though, but Gaia is able to measure it. And it was able to measure it pretty far. And the larger of a change, the larger of a shift, the closer it is, and you can work out the exact distance of the star. So that's something Gaia did. But it also would look for a motion in the star that was not fully explained by the back and forth. Maybe it went back and forth, but slightly this way. And in the next year, again, back and forth, slightly this way. That's the star's what we call proper motion, which is really just the stars move. The galaxy's not static. All the stars are moving around. It just looks static because the time scales are so long compared to a human life. So using that, knowing how far away it is, seeing how far it appears to move against the sky, and then if you use a thing called a spectrograph where you can measure the Doppler shift, red shift versus blue shift, same thing. If you haven't heard of that, I could explain that later. But you can figure out the radial motion. So you can see how far it's moving across the sky. That tells you, like, on the plane of the sky, how it's moving. And then you can figure out how it's moving radially. You then know its 3D position and 3D velocity in the sky. Gaia did this for over 1 billion stars.
Oh, wow.
Huge number. That's a huge data set. One of the interesting things is they threw in all sorts of Gaia data into these clustering algorithms. They were relatively new at the time. And this cluster algorithms identified multiple different groups, but there was this large group of stars that had similar dynamical properties. They moved in a similar way, but they moved differently than the rest of the disk, the rest of the main galaxy. So this common group of stars moving in the same way, and it's not the disk, and it wasn't the bar or the bulge or any of these other components of the galaxy. It's doing something very different than any major component of the galaxy. And the only way to explain it is because there had already been observations of other galaxies having galaxy collisions, and so people had already been thinking about what would happen in these galaxy collisions to the stars. And so the explanation was, well, this group of stars must be the remnants of some galaxy that the Milky Way ate long ago, but the imprint of it is still in the momentum of these stars, forever oscillating around, no longer part of their galaxy because they're mixed in, but they move together. And that was identified through this unsupervised machine learning model.
Oh, wow.
The machine learning model could not explain what it was. All it said was, man, this group is similar, and it's also different than this group. Well, it's like, well, if that group's all the Milky Way stars, then what is this group? And then astronomers go in and actually try to figure out, understand what's going on. So that's probably one of the most important, out of everything I have said, that is probably the most important use going forward in astronomy with machine learning techniques. Because these data sets are getting larger and larger and larger. Machine learning / AI has proven no capability of being able to understand the physics, but it can categorize and it can identify unique situations, or you can train it to maybe identify particular events, maybe things. You can identify things that you care about and tell it to look for more of those, or you tell it, hey, just look for anything different than anything else. That's like clustering. And in fact, this is so important, they're being built into the data pipelines of this next generation of telescopes. Probably the most important one, or the most prominent one, being the Vera-Rubin Observatory, which is part of the also called LSST, the LSST project, which is basically this giant camera survey that's going to image a lot. And they have built into the pipeline all sorts of little identifying algorithms, it's going to be able to automatically identify faraway supernova, the sort of thing where there's so many images, no human could ever hope to look at all of them to be able to notice, oh, a new star appeared in this galaxy, that's probably a supernova. There's just too many, there'll be too much data. And so that can be offloaded to the machine learning algorithm. We can tell it, we can train it to go, if you see something that looks like this, that's probably a supernova. If you see that, alert us, because supernova are temporary events. Once it happens, it might decay away. So you want to know about it as fast as possible. So the pipeline has this alert system where astronomers can sign up for it, or observatories can sign up for it. So it's oh, you get an alert. Just a supernova in this galaxy. Maybe you're an observatory. You have some extra observing time. So use your discretionary time and quickly slew over to look at it, because the LSST project doesn't do high depth data. It's very much like data at scale, not necessarily at depth. It doesn't do spectra, for instance. It doesn't do very high precision photometry. It doesn't do rapid cadence photometry. In fact, the cadence is every 3 days it'll be imaging a part of the sky. But you can send that information to someone else at another observatory, and if they go, oh, this is important, it's a what the field actually calls a target of opportunity. They might quickly change what they're doing to slew over and start observing it with the spectrograph, whatever instruments they have on board, just to try and collect some data before it's gone. That's just one example. There's this case for a lot of stuff. They have a whole near-Earth object detection through machine learning, looking for asteroids, things that might be asteroids near Earth. That's an example. There's all these little hooks in the pipeline that do all sorts of stuff.
Oh, wow.
And that wouldn't have been possible without a lot of these machine learning tools. And it's just so important because of the scale of the data. There's so much of it.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks for going over a lot of that. I very much appreciate it. I didn't know some of the stuff was going on. I'm gonna divert the question a little bit back over. With STEM VR and your time and you've been in it, is there anything you've learned in regards to your own field, or anything that's helped you out with what you do from within your events or people you've met?
To my own field. I guess short answer is no.
Okay.
I haven't met that many astronomers in VRChat, or at least not many other astronomers. At least ones that talk about it, at least. I've learned a lot about other fields. I've learned some about other subfields in astronomy, at least a little bit. But not really with my own research area, which is fine. I never envisioned STEMVR as a place for like serious science discussion to like form a collaboration that's going to change science. I've always viewed it as more of like an education sphere, or at least a sphere to grit mingling of many different fields so we can all just learn about, because we like learning for the sake of learning. Like, it's not going to help my field to understand the behaviors of various wasps in different ecosystems. Or it has nothing to do with my research, but I like learning, and it's cool to hear about that. And so that's why I keep keep putting energy into STEM VR.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that as well. With that said, how often do events run, and what have been some ones that you enjoy yourself?
So we have the weekly tea time, which usually they're on a schedule. We schedule it for like 2-hour blocks, but they're very, very open-ended with the ideas like, people can come in and come and go whenever they want. It's basically just a period where if you're in the community, we guarantee you there will be a host in the instance for that allotted time if you want to hang out. So sometimes a large group of people come in. Sometimes it winds up being quite small. Those are nice because they're quite casual. I really like the laid-back nature because that means it's very low effort for the hosts. We also do larger scale talks when we have someone volunteering as a speaker. I don't know, it's probably been one of our biggest issues is getting people to be able to volunteer to be a speaker. I think a lot of people are afraid to come up and talk about what they're interested in or what they work on, which I get that. There's also some also have concerns where they want to talk, maybe they want to talk on something very specific, but there can be an issue where if you get too specific in a research topic, it's not too hard to dox that person. I mean, heck, to be honest, anyone that watches this, if you really care about figuring out who I am, it's not actually that hard. I don't spend a lot of effort to hide it. You can figure out who I am from everything I have already said. But that's because I don't mind being known, particularly because I do want to actually try and introduce more like VR astronomy outreach stuff into the academic community and such. And there's some measure of you kind of have to be known for it in order for it to work. So I'm generally fine with that, but a lot of other people aren't. That's perfectly reasonable. So they might not want to get into specific topics, and they have they're worried about what level of detail to go into, and then they wind up not wanting to do a talk. Because that can be a lot of effort to try and figure out, if that's something you are worried about. It can be a lot of effort to kind of figure out how to talk about something you care about without doxing yourself or potentially doxing yourself. That's one reason. But I think probably the bigger reason is just people feeling like they don't have something to contribute when I think they do. But it's hard. It can be hard to convince people of that. Like, it's one thing to say like, hey, no, you can be able to do a talk on it, but people might not necessarily instinctively know that. So that's something I've been trying to work on. Okay. But when we do talks, usually they're in like 40 to 60-minute range. Usually what we try to do is like 45 minutes plus 15 minutes for questions. And when they happen, usually it's scheduled at the speaker's discretion, although usually that winds up being like maybe a right before or right after our standard tea time slots. Like I think we try to encourage, for the times we've done it, we've tried to make it align like right before tea time, with the idea it's like, hey, if you have further questions for the speaker, you can ask them at tea time as a casual breakout, whatever. We also would do watch parties occasionally. It's been a while since we've done that, mostly just, again, from time commitments for those who would actually organize it, because organizing things takes some effort and energy. And a lot of the people who have a lot of the motivation in STEM VR are the same people who have a lot of real-world job stuff that saps a lot of energy and and time. So that winds up being difficult. But again, that's something I'm hoping to address more, especially now the main hecticness of my own grad school is starting to dissipate. But then again, who knows? Maybe the new postdoc life is going to eat me alive even more. I guess we'll see. But
fair enough. You said something that makes me want to ask a question. Is you said you're hoping to get more people in the greater academic community into VR outreach. What is their general response to you trying to do that or being introduced to what's going on in here?
I think so. The responses I've gotten have ranged from people finding it quite interesting to just confusion. I don't think I've gotten like a negative response. I have gotten confusion though. And I think this is something I care a good amount about, is like how to introduce it into like the greater academic community and universities and such in a positive way. I'm not the only one doing this, right? It's been a thing people have been messing around with or trying for a while now. And I've just felt like a lot of attempts have been reasons they get mixed results, and I think there's some fundamental reasons they're not addressing. And I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from social VR that have not really been applied to a lot of attempts. So that's something I've been really interested in. And so the issues I found when trying to, like, it's one thing to tell someone and they go, oh, that's kind of neat. It's another to go, hey, look at this cool thing. Yeah, I find that really neat. Oh, okay, great. Can you give a grant to fund making this bigger or doing more? And then it's like, then grants money, right? It's basically just asking for money to do something. But that's how a lot of outreach stuff is created. Like a lot of museums get a grant to build a space museum or whatever. A lot of that's built on grant funding, right? Because the idea of this grant funding is like they want to encourage a lot of learning, or spreading, disseminating the information and such. But like VR is such an unknown quantity, it's viewed as basically a risk. Like, oh, how do we know that this grant money will wind up actually producing something that achieves our goals of spreading information, and it won't just enter the void? That's the thing they are concerned about. And the perceptions of VR in academia as an outreach tool is very mixed. And there's some valid reasons for it being mixed. A big part of it probably comes from the very early days of VR, like the Google Cardboard era, where a lot of groups trying to make these applications to do experience being on Mars or being on ISS. And they just weren't that great. Not necessarily the developer's fault. It was the very early days, right? And hardware was very primitive. Not many people really knew how to use VR. There weren't any big VR games. But I think now a lot of lessons have been learned, especially by a lot of developers. A lot of people in social VR. And so when I say social VR, basically I mean VRChat. There's not that many other social VR applications, but try to be general. In general, social VR has a lot of people who have learned, world developers as such who have kind of learned what the best principles to get something engaging to people are. You have a lot of game developers that have started to learn these, but I haven't seen those lessons being applied to science communication and outreach. At least not very often. There's a few exceptions. And so that's something I'm really interested in trying to use to convince the academic community. The thing to do isn't just to say, hey, I want to do this VR thing. That sounds really cool. You should give us grant money so that we can do this. They are going to want proof that it's possible. So a key thing, I think, is to try and slowly eventually try and build up something that's like examples of like, here are the things that can be done, which hopefully can convince small grants to be given. And with small grants, a key reason why a grant can be very important for this work. Let's take this world, for instance. So this is a world that I made. Mostly to show off this shader. I don't think the shader will necessarily come across on the camera very well, but the simple description is it's a accurate recreation of what the night sky looks like, trying to adjust the brightness of the stars so they look as close to what you would see in a dark sky location with your own eyes. Not super aesthetic and pretty, like a lot of worlds try to do some pretty night sky. It's trying to go for a realistic look, but you can do some interesting lessons and so on. So this world was just kind of put together to showcase the shader, because it's also a highly optimized shader that does it.
Oh, wow.
But one of the things you could do with that I've thought about with something like this could become a VR education or astronomy outreach thing. You could easily turn this into a lesson of how do you do star hopping? How do you use a telescope? Because like there's no weather to worry about. You don't have to worry about breaking a telescope. So you can teach someone how to navigate the night sky from any point on Earth. And you're trying to make it as realistic as possible. That might be real interesting. Now you could argue like, well, just go outside, but a lot of people live in like big cities or in a heavily light polluted region, and so they can't easily get that experience. And I would always encourage someone, if you have the chance, get the real life experience if you can. But that is an easier thing said than done. So something like this could easily be made into teaching about the night sky. You could another thing I thought about doing is you can make a shader like this show the motions of the stars. I had mentioned way before when I was talking about the research stuff that like the sky looks static because the time scales are so short or so long compared to the short human lifespan. But it's not extremely long time scales, at least for the constellations to appear to move. It's on the order of thousands or tens of thousands of years. And using 3D motion data that we have now, you can actually make very good estimations of where the stars were 10, 20, 30,000 years ago. So one of the things I haven't gotten around to doing it is making the skybox show like a movie, where you can see, like, let's watch 100,000 years of star motion in the sky. And 100,000 years is something you would actually probably notice. You would be able to look at this and see the stars moving. Something you would never experience in your life because of the time scale issue, but you would actually be able to show that here. So, these are all cool ideas that I've had for doing a world like this, for making an educational world thing. But there's a fundamental limit in that it's just me. It's just me. I'm not a shader developer. I'm not I do data analysis programming, but I'm not a game developer programmer. I'm not a UI. I don't know how to make good UI or good models. Like, I can do good enough to kind of show something off. But if I want to like actually make those things I've talked about, either I would have to make it my day job and have too much of an interest in my professional astronomy career to do that, or try and hire or build a team and like make a group that is able to develop it. And I'm firmly of the opinion that if you can, you should, like, if I want people to be able to work on shaders, I should be able to pay those people. These are artists, right? These are artists and developers who also have lives that they need to go on. If they're spending time on it, it'd be great if a lot of people would volunteer time. That can be a lot to ask. So it takes money. And this is where circling way back, grant money. So that's where, like, even, getting a small grant, like even smaller than museums would get, could go a long way to making at least a demonstration piece of, like, hey, you remember all those really shitty Google Cardboard apps? It's been a while since then. This is what you can do now. Something immersive, something social. You can learn with your friends. I think that's a really fundamental thing that's not being approached right now in a lot of these, like, education VR stuff. I really feel like the social component is an incredibly important piece. And so in order to actually convince the greater academic community, it's going to take some examples. And so I'm kind of stuck in this catch-22 problem of, like, I need examples to make a case that it's worth investing grant money to, like, do something new and interesting, and that will be effective. That's a key thing. Something that will be effective. But in order to get that, I need that grant. To make something really good, you kind of need grant money. So my approach to it so far has been to just go as far as I can on my own and talk about it as much as I can. I've talked about it in my own department. I've talked about it at conferences. You'd be surprised how many of, at least the ones that are around my age, or maybe a little bit older than me, how many of my colleagues, professional astronomers, some of them have graduated, they have their PhDs, know that I look like this in VR. You'd be surprised. And they all find it really interesting, right? But the key thing for me is just to get the communication, get it out there, trying to normalize it as much as possible. So that hopefully at one point I can write a successful application for grant money. I've actually written an grant application for it. Wasn't actually specifically for outreach. It was tied to a science program. Because that's something that's part of how the NSF funding system works. I did not get that grant though. So I'm gonna have to either wait or find other avenues for being able to do it. So it kind of sucks, but it's also kind of fun and interesting to see how far I can do. I've learned a lot. I've learned about Blender modeling and shader code and such. I'm not a shader programmer or a modeler, but it's still been kind of cool to learn the bits of them, and hopefully at some point I'll be able to gather together a group to develop something, at least one example maybe, and show it off. Like my dream is probably being able to make something that kind of reaches some minimum viable product, right? Some minimum level of, like, this has enough stuff that it's worth using as a tool to try and convince people that this is a valid use of education funding, even a very small amount. And then taking that and showing it at, like, AAS. AAS is the American Astronomical Society, who has a big yearly meeting, and they'll sometimes have booths for stuff. And so my dream has always been, like, it would be really fascinating to get a small booth at the American Astronomical Society and showcase it, because that would get a huge amount of exposure. And normalization, which is probably the key thing, which will make it easier to get another round of grant money. So that's the dream, but there's a lot on my plate, so it's been hard to balance it. But that's something I've been pushing. Like I mentioned, I'm not the only one. I know there's other groups that are doing it. I think my personal unique take is probably coming at it from a social VR angle. I can't think of any other major groups, at least major I should clarify something. Because there's a massive exception to this. There's no other major groups in the greater academic community. But if you get a little bit more focused on the Japanese community, they do have an equivalent. VSP, which I mentioned way before in the conversation, they have several very excellent, very well put together astronomy and space themed museum world that they spend a lot of effort on. And it's very well done. If you haven't been there, highly recommend. They have English translations for pretty much everything. The people who made, I've met a few of the people who've made it. At least I've met and talked to the ones who know English, who can speak English natively. They're all really cool, chill people. But a cool little thing I like to point out. I like to point out that when I've talked about it to the professional settings, I have talked about that world, and I think a lot of people have been very convinced. Oh, that is really impressive. But it's hard to fully use as a convincing argument because there's mystery with the it's a smaller niche Japanese community that worked on it. That's not well known, in the actual astronomy academic community. So I've had mixed success. Although I do like to point out, it's hey, one of the reasons they got that well done is because they had some support. I can't remember what kind of support. I think mostly just help. I don't think it was financial support, but I think it was assistance with various things. But they had support from University of Tokyo. I'm pretty sure.
I wouldn't be surprised on that. One thing Raptor and I found out through a lot of our conversations with people is Japan is very big on tech, so things like VR is very much supported in terms of use for almost everything. So I'm not surprised if the University of Tokyo sponsored any bit of that at all. I would be very shocked if they didn't. Hello, I'm actually here to interrupt the episode you're watching really quick to ask you a favor. Please come join us at any of the other locations we have. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify, both of which we post our episodes and are very up to date on both. We have Discord where you go to hang out all the time, where you're gaming and shooting the breeze over with many people over that way. Feel free to come join us. I invite you. If you wish to support us, we have a Patreon where we post a bunch of random bits, bobs, and extra podcasts every once in a while for you to go enjoy. Also, if you wish to support us while in VRChat, we're now part of the creator economy. So please come join if you wish to support us there. It's there for you to choose if you so wish. And thank you very much. And a special thanks to some of the people who have signed up on our Patreon, which are as follows. And I have written down so I'll remember. And that's a tough thing. Forbidden Zero, Niche, Aliquum, Future Oracle, Lesser Capybara, and Frozen. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Yeah. The sad thing is that it's not known very well outside that community, which is the sad thing. But at the same time, it's not that surprising because, to be honest, a lot of astronomers don't actually keep up to date with latest in outreach technique stuff. It's way more word of mouth than you might expect. Traditional astronomy outreach techniques have not really changed in a very long time. No issue with that. There's a reason why we do what we do when we're doing in-person stuff. It's just such a new thing, and no one really knows how to approach it or to use it. And so I guess, yeah, like I've iterated before, my hope is to be able to be part of trying to push it, right? To push something interesting. Because I really do feel like VR adds a unique means of doing a lot of different presentations or different ways of teaching. But it also takes way more effort. In-person outreach, easiest thing ever. If you're comfortable kind of talking to people, and you know how to don't drop the meteorite rock, and you kind of know how to point the telescope, with your hands is not a really fancy thing. you can get started. You know, that first year grad student or even undergrads, you just let them at it. They can do it. Quite easy. It's not that hard. You know, a telescope might be expensive, but you can do it with binoculars too. There's a lot of creativity with how to do that, so it's quite easy. But VR stuff is an incredible amount of effort compared to that. Which maybe that's another barrier for really pushing it forward. But there's so much you could do, right? Because you can connect people around the world with social VR stuff. You can, sit in settings. I mean, you could draw a comparison to real life stuff with like a planetarium. You can physically visit a planetarium. But you can't visit a planetarium that's the size of a forest, or that has fake virtual telescopes that you can move around to learn how to use a telescope. You can have a world. I have a like half put together one I've worked on for so long. That's a research observatory. That like the sort of place where if you went there in person and you knew the right people, you could probably get a tour as a general public. But most people will never be one at the type of observatory, the type of place where astronomy research is done. Most people will never be to a place like that. They'll never be inside the dome and see what that actually looks like and see what all the components look like. How did the instrumentation work? You might see pictures of it, maybe a slideshow, maybe a video. But it's an entirely other thing to be like, here's the camera, and it's this big honking thing. It's like, just big. You get some sense of that scale, right? It's a whole other thing to physically be there. It's a whole other thing to physically be, but especially for a place that being quote unquote physically being someplace where you never really could go. Not to mention just straight up being like, okay, you're on the surface of Mars now, right? To go the extra step. You're now in Mars. You're not floating in deep space. Or changing scales around, hold a galaxy in your hand. That's something I've really wanted to do, is like a shader generated galaxy, and I'm not good enough at shaders to do that. But that's something that's totally doable. And like, here's a galaxy in your hand. Let's talk about the components of a galaxy. Instead of it just being a picture, here's a picture and draw it out. You can see the three-dimensionality of it. You can get a sense of the scale of the different parts of it. Maybe hold two different galaxies. You can more easily kind of see the different morphology, like why is this one a different color than this one? You can talk about it with physical props. You can't really achieve very well in real life. I don't think it would never supplant classes. Like if you really want to actually get into astronomy, you're not going to do a degree or a doctorate inside VR. But as a general outreach tool for the general public, like someone who's like, they just want to learn something interesting. They don't have any professional stake in it. It'd be great. People who maybe can't visit a physical museum. Some of the greatest planetariums are in big cities like New York City or Griffith Observatory in LA. Maybe you live in, you live somewhere on a completely different continent, and you want it'd be really great to see the Hayden Planetarium or something like it, something that shows something as cool as that. But you live in, insert random country that's not the States, and maybe it's kind of hard to get to the States. Or maybe you want to see the ALMA array, which is this big radio observatory array that's in the Chilean desert. It's not easy to get there. It's also a very, very harsh place to go, at the Atacama Desert. Very harsh. But with VR, you can get a sense of the scale of it. These observatories, LSST, the VR Rubin Observatory. Imagine being in a giant model of it. These telescopes are huge. And it's one thing to see a picture and people standing next to it. It's another to stand in the catwalks as you look at this telescope and go, wait, this is a dome, but it's the size of an entire fucking building. And the whole thing's moving. You just can't get that because, of physical limitations. And that's where VR stuff can really step in and really shine. But again, it takes a lot of effort. It's not easy. I'm sure a lot of people who have done VRChat world development will say that. And also, I would guess those that say, no, it's not that hard, are probably just really experienced and are really good at it. Your average person who's not a modeler or anything, or a programmer or whatever, or hasn't spent a lot of time doing it, it's not the easiest thing. Yeah. Anyway,
Well,
that's...
Well, I'm sure also VR would be really good at seeing simulations from what you do in your field very differently. Like, I've talked to some world developers and game developers, and seeing a game on a flat screen, like a simulation of a black hole, for an example, if you're to do something more towards you, is different from what you would see if you're to see it in VR. Like, if you play a video game like a shooter and play it on a flat screen, most of what you'll see will be different versus if you're in a headset, because you're more up close to it. You can touch it, you can interact with it, you can move around with it. You can see the gun, the texture wrapping, or the seam on it a lot easier than if you're just to kind of be in a flat screen TV, as an example.
Yeah, I can't say for certain how professionally useful that would be. It might be. I'm not saying it's not, that it wouldn't be.
I wouldn't be pressured. It'd be cool. As an example.
But it would be really cool. I would admit, I would love to actually see some of these things in VR. That almost makes me think of a somewhat related and side tangent thing, which is about how the rendering of simulations. Tracking issues stuff. But I could go on forever on that, and that's a complete side tangent. But yeah, no, it'd be really cool to see. I would love to see a galaxy collision simulation as a 3D model in front, just because that'd be cool. Or even just honestly a nice 3D model of a galaxy. Like, every single one I've seen that you can import in Unity kind of sucks. I'm gonna say they all kind of suck. Maybe I'm just too nitpicky because I studied them, but I think it could be done really well. The one example of a galaxy done decently well, I still have nitpicks, but decently well, is probably Elite Dangerous as a well done rendering. And I also happen to know that they achieved that by hiring like 2 astronomers to develop the code that generated their galaxy. They hired some professional consultation to do that. I still have nitpicks though, but to be fair, they developed their code like 15 years ago.
Okay. Well, I'll ask the last 2 questions before we start wrapping this up. First of which is, where did you get your name from, and why do you still use it?
Okay, this is a kind of funny story. So, long ago, like a lot of people, you had your middle school in-game name, your IGN. That might be a little cringy. So mine was Killer Rabbit. It was a reference to Monty Python, if anyone's seen Monty Python on the Grill. So I was Killer Rabbit. And my Steam it was my username. I just applied to everything, Steam and such. It also happened to be my GitHub username. And I adopted Astro Rabbit my first year of grad school. And the reason I adopted it was I had a project, and I had a project we were working on with a group. It was a code. It was basically working on a software thing for observatories. I mean, practice stuff. It was for a class, and so we had our meeting with the professor. Who also happens to be my advisor now, but and I had the GitHub page pulled up. And my advisor asked, why is your GitHub called Killer Rabbit? And I just remember going, like, the color drained from my face, because I'm like, oh shit, I didn't think about this. Oh god, that's my professional front-facing name here. Oh no. That's kind of cringy. Dies of cringe. But I didn't want to do the standard thing that everyone does, where they just made their GitHub last name, first name, or something. I was like, that's lame. So I don't fully remember what spurred it, but thought, I'll keep the rabbit motif. And I think I saw artwork similar to my symbol there, the little space bunny. And the name just popped into my head, like, Astro Rabbit. Yeah, that'll work. So I made it my GitHub name. So the Astro Rabbit was actually first applied to GitHub. And then time went on. I joined VRChat. And around when I decided, I'll try doing the astronomy talks in VRChat, and it's like, well, I should change my name to something that applies more. Because like some of those people that did like piano stuff, they had their name being like, piano person or whatever. And then it just occurred like, well, my GitHub username is Astro Rabbit. And I'll set that as my VRChat name. I'll use that. That's, it has a fit. It's interesting and kind of fits the vibe I was going for. I had adopted this piece of artwork as my little symbol. I changed my Discord username, and then over time, I slowly stopped being. To be honest, I never had an attachment to my in-game name of Killer Rabbit, but I started to develop this identity as Astro Rabbit, that guy that talked about space in VRChat. And so it started to supplant it everywhere. So I wound up becoming Astro Rabbit everywhere. So that's how I got the name. And I like it, so I've stuck with it ever since. So.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. And the last question I have for you is the avatar you're in. What is it? Why do you use it? And is there anything about it that means anything to you?
I guess to answer that, I would need to actually change avatars real quick.
Okay.
So what you've been seeing me in this whole time is I like to just think of it as my dress ups for different seasons. I like to do different seasons, but the original version of my avatar was not too dissimilar than this. This has undergone various updates over the years, so it's not quite exactly how it was originally, but this is pretty close. And the reasoning for my avatar came from a mashup of ideas. I guess I should show one thing before I discuss it, which is the cursed original thing I did. So originally, people would see in the pug or the black cat, this whenever it loads. I don't know if it's loaded for you.
Server processing right now. I'll let you know as soon as it's loaded.
Lovely.
Oop, one unpacking, instant. Oh, I see it now.
This is what people saw. Kind of cursed. Kind of creepy. But it was also funny because I had VR and I was just a static image, and I was like, this sucks. Hold on, I'm gonna go back. I don't like being a static image. So I wanted a 3D model avatar, and I didn't know anything about modeling. I didn't know anything about Unity, like bare minimum stuff. And so I went hunting. My first thought that popped into my head is, wouldn't it be kind of funny if there was an anime Carl Sagan? Couldn't find it. No one had made an anime model of Carl Sagan. Someone's listening. They want to make an anime Carl Sagan. That would be kind of funny. But a different thought occurred to me because I think I saw, actually not this jacket. It was a different model of jacket. But I was wandering like DeviantArt, I think, at different models. I saw this jacket and I saw like a turtleneck sweater somewhere. And then it popped into my head because this is if anyone hadn't noticed from the image or knew Carl Sagan before, this is a lot like how Carl Sagan dressed. And so I thought, okay, well maybe I could take a model and dress it as Sagan. And I needed a base avatar. So, and I don't even know why, but one of the first thoughts that popped in my head was the Earth-chan meme, because I'd been going around before, like when I had, like at the time, at that moment in time. And so I thought it would be kind of interesting to have like Earth-chan but dressed as Sagan, because everyone was doing like Earth-chan NASA or with COVID, or in T-shirt with NASA stuff. And I thought it would be kind of interesting to do a professional-looking take on the meme. So I thought, okay, well maybe Earth-chan as dressed as Carl Sagan. So I got a base model, with the hair and everything. This is the original hair. And I spent, oh God, it was like multiple weeks figuring out how to do clothes fitting in Blender to manually fit the clothes, and it was very clunky. What you're seeing now is after learning for several years how to get better at it. It was way clunkier. So I did that, and people thought it was interesting. They thought it was cute. They thought it was interesting. So I stuck with it. Again, I should put it up. I had the speech bubble saying, "Ask me about astronomy." But this time as a literal like speech bubble. I'm gonna make that go. I'll make that go away now. And did what I did before, where I'd go into instances. I kept doing. I spent the effort on this avatar because I'd gotten positive reception to when I did it in the Sagan thing. I got more reception in VR because now I could talk with my hands. I'm sure I'm never conscious of it, but I'm sure I've been talking with my hands this whole time. In VR, I kind of let that expressiveness come out. And like many people in VRChat, you slowly get sucked into the vortex more and more. Eventually, I wanted slightly better VR. I had a Rift S at the time, so I sold that and got an Index, and then I got trackers, and the spiral, whether it's downwards or upwards, I guess depends on your point of view. But I just got more and more into it. Into VRChat. I never made any other characters really other than this character. I think it's because I spent all this time with just this dress up. Then I started to experiment a bit more and doing like other stuff. I did the seasons, and I've done like a black hole version of my avatar where it's still like the same body and stuff, but I would do different versions. I think the most recent big change has been I've changed the hairstyle, but it's still Earth. Like you probably saw my winter one when we go back to it. If it looks like, what's the white in the Earth? It's supposed to be like winter themes. Doing the seasons. And again, I was experimenting with a new hairstyle. But it's still in my mind, it's like the same avatar, right? Yeah. It's almost like, I just got a new hairstyle. I mean, it's a model, right? But and I just got more and more like my identity merged, right? That might be one of the reasons why I'm more okay now with the fact that's like not necessarily hiding my real identity. At this point, they're like blended together. There's not really a separation. People who have met me in person, who met me in VRChat, have said like, that I'm exactly the same. There's almost zero difference between me and VRChat in real life, other than looks, because surprise, I don't look like this in real life. So yeah, I guess that's basically the story. I did a few things. I did my own customizations to the body though, beyond stuff like proportioning to my body, like the arm, leg height and such are my real life body proportions, because that makes full body tracking more accurate. But I did stuff like my eyes. My eyes are custom. They're the same across almost all my avatars, other than a few special ones like the black hole one. If I don't know if it comes across in the camera, but it's actually two galaxies colliding.
Okay.
You can kind of see that.
Yep, you can see it on camera.
With people drawn on it. That's actually a Hubble image. That the moon is a custom job from me. So I'm sure you might have noticed the moon just slowly going around my head over and over and over again. So yeah, that's basically that's the story of the avatar. And I've never, other than maybe for some memes when I've been hanging out with people on a very casual basis, hop into some silly avatar, but never as a main. I'm always this character just in different dress ups.
Okay.
I'm not gonna go through all of them, but like I'll give one example. This was Winter Avatar for several years ago. So example where it's like it's the same character, same avatar, but stuff hairstyle would change, the clothing might change, but it's fundamentally the same. Special effects might change. Right now I got a different type of snow, or here I'll do one other. This is my fall avatar. I just realized I'm now kind of shorter. This is my fall avatar, so you should be seeing like leaves falling from the hair. I have dress up. The funny thing is, this is actually extremely close to how I look in real life. Not necessarily my face and hair, but dress up. This is basically almost exactly how I dress in real life. Except maybe the necklace or jewelry. If you see a piece of jewelry on me, wherever it is, that's a fun little quirk of this avatar. Everyone will see it differently. Fun thing. So I learned a lot of unique stuff that's not related to science outreach by doing a lot of silly things. For instance, if you want to see the special effect on this, like here, do you see an earring, a necklace, or a bracelet? Right
I see a bracelet.
You see a bracelet. Look away, then look back.
I still see a bracelet.
The camera included.
Ah. Oh, it's an earring now. That's neat.
For anyone who's in the know, you might notice that the symbol, the symbol is the Eye of the Universe from the game Outer Wilds. I really love that game.
That's a good game.
It's mimicking a game mechanic in Outer Wilds. So it'll bounce. If you look away and look back again, it will jump around. There's 3 potential positions for the jewelry. A fun little thing I added to this avatar.
Oh, that's a really neat mechanic. Look away, come back. Oh, it's back to a bracelet again. That's interesting. Oh, well,
Yeah, it is.
I will say thank you very much, Astro Rabbit, for giving us your time, learning all about you and STEM VR. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Oh, so where
Yes, indeedy.
can the audience find you or STEM VR if they wish to find you or STEM VR?
So one of our members has generously made a redirect link, so you can actually search in a web browser stemvr.chat. Now I'll redirect you to our Discord. You can also look for STEM VR in VRChat under the groups. Just look for STEM space VR. That should take you to the group. It is open. So you don't. It's not a like request to join and get approved. I think it should just be open. Yeah, and then keep an eye out for announcements. We do tea times on Saturdays. They're 2 different times. It bounces every other week. One is we have a EU time slot and a US time slot. I think this next week is an EU time slot, which for the EU should be 9 p.m. And my native time zone, it's 2 p.m. It's more like an afternoon thing. Most of the states, it's like an afternoon. The EU time slots. US time slot is like 10 p.m. Eastern. So it bounces back and forth because we have a lot of people in the European community in STEM VR as well.
Oh, well, all of that will be in the description for you, the audience member. If you're on Spotify, that'd be in the episode description. On YouTube, if you kind of scroll down a bit, you'll see the description, hit show more, and in both you'll see a section called guest links. Everything will have very conveniently placed down there. And if Futureline can find it, the world that Astro Rabbit mentioned at the beginning, maybe be down there. Don't hold me to it. Futureline will be doing this or uploading this at 1 a.m. at some point, so I do apologize. And we will ask you, the audience member, a question this time. So we're going to ask you this. Back when you were during school, it could be middle school, high school, college, grad school, whatever it is? What is something that has stuck with you? Mine isn't something that is learned. Mine's something more goofy. I remember a history teacher in high school was teaching a U.S. history lesson, and he was telling a sperm joke for some reason, kicked a hole in the wall at the same time the principal decided to come by. It stuck with me, haven't forgotten it since. With that said, Mr. Raptor, you know the thing.
You know, Lion, I've landed here on this nice planet Earth and everything else and got my capsule around here and everything else like this, but one problem is I can't get the lid off to get out. So I'm going to be here for a while, folks. We'll talk to you later and see you next time. Somebody get this thing off my head. We'll talk to you later. Bye. God damn, this box drives. Left turn. Take another left turn. And another left turn. I'm doing a circle jerk. Whoops. I shouldn't have said that out loud. What the hell? Whee! Come here, box. Let's move. Nice.